The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hey, good morning or good afternoon from wherever you are listening to our webcast, and welcome to Resource Management Maturity. And how will you rate your resource management discipline after we have the webcast? That's what's going to be interesting. So after today's webcast, we hope that you have a perspective of where your practice is today. So our agenda is going to be to discuss upfront some methodologies of how to classify the level of your maturity within your resource management practice. And then you're going to get to hear a live example from Knowledge Engineering and how they have really taken that resource management practice and driven efficiencies into their business and then matured their resource management discipline. So it's a very exciting story, and we're so excited to have Fern joining us. So just a couple of quick housekeeping items. So you're going to get this presentation and then the recording within 48 hours of the webcast. This webcast will last right around 45 minutes. And please put any questions that you might have in the question panel, and we're going to answer those questions via email after the webcast. Now, let me quickly introduce myself. I'm Kim Coster, and I'm a project management evangelist with Unanet, and I'll be joined today by Fern Sinclair, who is a project manager for Knowledge Engineering, and we look forward to sharing our best practices with you today. So I'm just going to jump right in. And so say to yourself, when I sit through a webcast, I say, what's the why? Why am I here? And what's the so what? So I thought I'd start with what the so what is. If by optimizing resource allocation, we can increase utilization by just 1% for a 100-person company with a bill rate of $200 per hour, I can increase with that 1% revenue by $384,000 per year. If I can do it by 2%, that's $768,000 a year in additional revenue. Very important in today's competitive environment, and very important from an overall profitability perspective for your company. Now, each year, Unanet participates in an industry benchmarking exercise with CohnReznick, and the result is a gauge report. And if you've not seen the gauge report, you should go out to unanet.com and grab a copy right now of last year's report. The upcoming report is going to be released mid-September, and you'll find it on our website, the same place around that time period, again, mid-September. All right, so one of the questions we asked is, how mature is your resource management practice? Now, 6%, which is the orange, say that they're very mature. 4% say that they're mature. 45% say that they're somewhat mature. And so we have about 45% saying that they're immature. Now, I talk to a lot of companies that are still using disparate spreadsheets to manage their resource management practice. And I do think that over the coming years that resource management will become an emerging discipline, and people are going to really start to pay a tremendous amount of attention to it in the future, because there's increased competition, a lot of pressure to win new business, and a lot of pressure for companies to be profitable. One way to be more profitable and maximize your revenue, as we just talked about, is to maximize your resources. So in this webcast, we want to do some polls. So, your participation just makes it more fun for everybody on the webcast. So Jess, let's launch that first poll. So what do you believe is your current resource management level of maturity? Very mature, mature, immature, or very immature? And so I think that a lot of the folks that were categorizing themselves as 40 or 45% that were categorizing themselves as somewhat mature, I bet if people were really honest about it, that some of those could have moved into the somewhat immature category, depending on how you actually look at that overall practice. So it'll be interesting to see what this looks like. But my bet is that we get the majority of the folks are going to say that are on the webcast today that they're immature. So Jess, do you have the poll answers yet?
I do. So we have 2% are very mature, 25% are mature, 57% consider themselves immature, and then 16% are very immature. So it runs a gamut.
All right, well, perfect. Thanks, Jess. And thank you guys for filling out the poll. We really appreciate it. That gives us an idea of probably where we are from a maturity perspective and with the folks on the phone. So this may be a little bit of an eye chart, but I just want to assure you that you're going to get this. You're going to get both this slide deck as well as a flip book that we've put together for attending this webinar. And I want to cover this at a high level. I don't intend to go through each block, but I just want to talk about it at a high level. So in order to be able to define the level of maturity, I took the CMMI model, and probably most people are familiar with that, at least at a high level, and I tailored it for high-level resource management. So you're going to see something very similar in Fern's portion of the presentation, but it's really going to be more around an actual process and tools, okay? So if you're familiar with this model, it has 5 levels. It's going to start at ad hoc, and then it goes down to level 5, and that's continuous improvement. Now, in addition, for this I have characterized each level by people, processes, tools, as well as culture and vision. So at level 1, I think of it as the Wild West, okay? There's minimal training, there's very basic guidance, most likely spreadsheets are the tool of choice, and then resources are kept in silos, project by project, within those Excel spreadsheets. There's lots of emailing that's going on, telephone calls, to really decide on the availability of the resources. And there can also be a lot of panic with the project managers as they realize that maybe a critical skill isn't available, or worse, they don't have that skill at the company at all. And from a mentality perspective, people will say, hey, that's how we've always done it, and we've been able to press through. Level 2, they realize that people at this level have realized that they really don't want to live in that chaos anymore and begin to recognize the importance of standardization, at least on a project-by-project basis. So there will be training around the use of policies and procedures and tools, and these may be project-centric, and that's okay. Now, the organization is most likely starting to use a best-in-class ERP tool like Unanet, and projects will be resourced, and most likely those projects will be resourced somewhat with manual activity, but starting to have some automation. Now, the organization is going to recognize too that labor and resources really are the main source of revenue, and they really need to optimize them. Now, at level 3, this is where you recognize that there are efficiencies that can only be realized if you do resource management at the enterprise level and have everybody playing for the same team. So there's going to be very clear policies and procedures for the entire organization, and there's going to be role-based training for those policies and procedures and tools. Everyone's truly using a true ERP, and I just wanted to point out that ERP stands for Enterprise Resource Planning Tool. So if you're looking at a true ERP and you select one, or if you're on this call and you're thinking about selecting one, you should have one that really has resource planning at the heart of the tool, not something that's an add-on. Now, in level 3 of the maturity, the entire enterprise can see supply and demand. Now, across the organization, we're going to be able to see that the right people with the right skills are on the right task at the right time. And that's really, to me, where you really start to optimize your resource management discipline. And you can see overall that we'll see this overall improvement that I was referencing when we first started the webcast. This becomes the time where you can really begin to realize that, and the organization is truly acting as a matrix organization, okay? Again, becoming very efficient. Level 4 is where you're completely data-driven. Your organization is driving data to make overall decisions. You've got KPIs and metrics that are available to all the different stakeholders, making hiring and resource usage decisions on a regular basis. Okay, and then level 5 is the continuous loop of improvement, and this is where you're really attracting that top talent, you're providing career paths, everything is really firing on all 4 cylinders. Okay, so that gets us to our next poll, and after thinking about that and looking at the 5 different levels, where do you think that your practice falls after you've considered that? So would it be initial or ad hoc, project by project, level 3, which would be enterprise-wide, 4, which is data-driven, or 5, which is continuous improvement? And over the years, I've done a lot of different, gone into a lot of different clients and seen how they actually implement resource planning, and I bet that most people are at a 2. If they're really honest with themselves, they're at a 2. Say somewhere between a 2 to a 2.5. Okay? So, Jess, have we been able to get the poll done now?
We have. So in the initial or ad hoc group, we have 10% of the folks. On the project by project, we have 69%. Enterprise-wide is 19%, and then data-driven is 2%. And we had none on continuous improvement.
Okay, so most people here are about at a level 2, probably a 1, 2. That's great. Awesome. Thanks, Jess, for that. I appreciate it. Now, in the flip book that you're going to get, we're going to see there's a set of charts and pages that you'll be able to look and see how to move from the different levels. But I'm going to walk through one example, just kind of give you an idea of what you might need to do, of how to move from level to level. But you'll be getting the rest of them again after the webcast. So if you're at level 1, you know, you really are achieving those results, so you're getting results. I don't want to make anybody think that they're not able to execute their projects at level 1, but there's a whole lot of individual effort and heroics that's going on in order to make that happen. And it really isn't sustainable long term for people to have to work in those silos and then have all that emailing, etc., going on. The other thing too is that you've got a lot of staff. You don't really know how you're utilizing them, and you could have somebody who is being utilized at 150%, so you may have staff burnout. So something that you may definitely want to fix. So as I move from level 1 to level 2, we'd have to agree as an organization that we're ready to mature that resource management practice and do it, and then create policies and procedures that establish best practices for your organization. And then assure that those teams are going to be successful with those policies and procedures. And in order to do that, you really need to go out and survey the teams and understand what they need from a total project management perspective. How are they going to be successful? What's the right answer for them? Then make sure that you have a repository, something that's very easy for them to access. And then as they begin to implement the process, and again, remember level 2 is project by project, have a feedback loop from the teams to make sure that those policies are being followed and that there's something that works for them very well, okay? And then create a self-audit plan. So go off and look, make sure that everything is being followed, that the tools are being used correctly in the way that you intended it to be used. That's a really big set of activities if you think about it, but it's something that's very necessary. And in this section, moving from 1 to 2, you're going to really want to concentrate on the basics. So making sure that you have resource names, when they're available, what the skills are of the people who are available, and then be able to see what you want to define some key performance indices for the projects. Okay, and you may want to define those as an organization or project by project, but really understand what are you going to be looking at? What's going to really help you drive your business from an overall resource management perspective? You know, One thing about role-based training that's really important is a lot of times people get in their silos and they forget that what they do actually affects somebody down the chain. So you want to make sure that they understand if they put something in or don't put in that they're utilizing a resource, how that may affect the next project or the next guy on the next project. And most of the time that really helps people respond well. And you'll want to evaluate tools and make sure that you have a tool that's really going to grow with your basic needs. Now again, in the flip book, you're going to get this exact same thing from level 2 to 3, 3 to 4, and 4 to 5. But I really wanted to have time today to concentrate on Fern and Knowledge Engineering. So you'll get that. And if you have any questions, my email is at the end of the webcast, and I'm happy to talk to you at any time. So people always ask, hey, Kim, do I have to get to level 5? And that answer is no. When you establish what your plan is going to be and what your vision is, make a decision as to where you want to be. A lot of organizations might want to stop at a 3, and that's fine. Or they may want to stop at a 3.5. Or they may have a timeline that they need to execute to. Or they may have a budget that they have to adhere to and just can't get past that, maybe with this particular tool or a particular a way that they want to collect data. So I would tell you that it's very important as a group to make a decision as to what level you want to be at, and then establish that roadmap and that overall timeline. Okay, so you don't have to get to a 5 to be successful. Just have to make a decision of what's right for your organization and your teams. All right, so there's a lot of benefits for maturing your resource management practice, and I know that these seem very basic, but I just want to go over them quickly so that, if you're making a case within your organization that, you take these and think about these, and maybe these help formulate that case that you're going to take to your management team or your C-suite. So from a benefits, improve visibility and control into the enterprise resource needs and overall utilization. And again, we talked about what that means as far as increased revenue, increased profitability. You're also going to have improved predictability, and that's really huge. You think about how important that is for a customer to make sure that they understand when you're going to finish, that you're going to have resources in order to complete those tasks. Something that's very important. Also, that you're going to have a set of common org standards. So you'll have consistent reporting. You should have a reduction of rework, and then a reduced dependence on overall heroes within your organization. So the data is going to be available for everybody to actually look at. Project management teams, I think a lot about that. I've been on a lot of them over the years, and a lot of times we would be down there just turning the crank. Sometimes there till 4 o'clock in the morning turning the crank. This gives, if we really concentrate on it and give people the right people, processes, and tools, then they're really able to help optimize and really work on execution of projects versus sitting there, again, turning the crank. And then more effective communication with project teams to the senior management, and more on-time and on-budget projects that are going to really help delight your customers. Not every single time with a customer is every project going to be on time and on budget, but being able to communicate and tell them where you are and be predictable is very important. So with that, now I am so pleased to have Fern Sinclair from Knowledge Engineering tell us a little bit about their journey with resource management and maturing their discipline. And so Fern, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Kim. So yeah, I work for Knowledge Engineering, and we're a small business R&D firm specializing in the characterization, development, scale-up, and transition of chemical processes. So our customer base is comprised of various DoD agencies, DOE labs, and then commercial companies in the pharma, specialty, and fine chemical sectors. Our resource team is comprised of engineers and scientists, and our management team is focused on leveling around 50 resources across 40 active projects at any given time to ensure we have what we call productive charging. Then our portfolio of projects ranges from low-risk, multi-year efforts to the fast-paced efforts requiring heavier resourcing over shorter periods of time. And then we execute various contract types, including time material, firm fixed price, and cost plus fixed fee. So we move on to the next slide. The revenue and profit for each of these contract types is governed by different criteria, as shown here in the table. Now, I'm not going to discuss each line item in detail, but for each of the different contract types, the considerations from the planning, monitoring, forecasting stages are unique and specific per project, and Unanet provides a variety of reports that ensures each of these scenarios is a success by providing up-to-date real-time data. So the next slide. Other considerations. So for the long-term government R&D projects, these tend to have a slow and steady period of performance with the flexibility to redirect our resources to the higher demand projects. The technical progress in billing is based on completing milestones for firm fixed price, or is based on actual cost on a monthly basis for the cost plus fixed fee. And the period planning budgeting tends to be a month at a time. In contrast, the high demand projects with a shorter period of performance in the commercial sector, these tend to be fast paced with a higher burn rate, and we need the ability to redirect our resources as needed to make sure we meet the customer's objectives. The technical progress this time is based on a work breakdown structure, where the billing is on monthly T&M charges, and the period planning tends to be a week at a time. So on the next slide, moving on to the key business metrics. So as a service-based company, the people are what drives our business and governs our success. And the metrics shown here, the revenue, the profit, the income, they're all critical to our success. And on the next slide, a single JSR report in Unanet can extract and sort through all of these costs, displaying each of its own line item in the report to ultimately provide the bottom line. And then the following table in the next slide, this just highlights the various ways that Unanet enables these metrics to be viewed and how they're calculated. So for example, you can view as revenue from labor or revenue per hour paid. And again, without going through each line item, the take-home message is Unanet's an extremely powerful tool that displays a vast amount of information, but in a simple manner. And it also has the ability for custom reports that can present the same data, but in a different way, depending on the metric of interest. So bearing all this in mind, I'm going to walk us through the workflow that we typically adopt for a short-term time material project. So in the next slide, this block diagram illustrates the key steps involved in project execution. So we have project bid, project initiation, resource planning, resource assignment, project execution, and then project closeout. So although Unanet has the capability to track project bids, we currently don't use this feature. So for the rest of the presentation, I'm just going to focus in on project initiation through to project execution, so steps 2 through to 5. So in the next slide, once a project's awarded, our first step in the company is we set the project up in Unanet. So Unanet provides various controls that we put into place right from the beginning to help the project monitoring. So for example, the appropriate time reporting settings must be selected to ensure accurate data is captured when we're forecasting or reporting our billable revenue. You need to consider whether the project requires tasks for time reporting. So this requires the resources to actually select tasks on their time cards, and in return, this will allow data to be extracted cost by task. The project reporting, and this helps prevent any unnecessary charging and keep everything in check. And you can select a project approver to also approve the hours and expenses charged to a project. So this ensures resources are charging as planned and budgeted. And finally, you can set up alerts with regards to the project metrics of interest. So for example, this grid thing shown here shows the alert has been set up to notify the project manager, the lead, and the approver when the gross revenue has exceeded 90% of that funded. So these are just all examples of the controls that can be put into place during the project setup. So on the next slide, we're moving on to step 2, which is your resource considerations. So there are various factors to consider here. For example, what skill set is required to complete the project, who is available, what labour categories you choose. And to help narrow down the pool of available resources you have, Unanet can provide a people resource allocation report, as shown here on the right. Now, this report displays a list of your workforce and then their percentage workload within a desired time frame, whether it's weeks or months, however you wish to view it. So for this example shown here, it's a monthly view, where I can see that the people in yellow have the capacity to take on more work compared to the people in red, who are actually overloaded in this case, indicating to me that some of their time actually needs to be redistributed to those who are in yellow. So this report can also be viewed as a people plans or as people assignments. And so it's an extremely useful report to use in the resource planning stages. And then that moves nicely onto the next slide, where this chart illustrates the various levels you can be at when planning and assigning your resources. So we have the level 0 through to 2, and these are where plans are not considered, but only assignments, whether that's open assignments or not. And then as you climb up the ladder, so level 3 introduces plans at a period of performance level that can be converted to assignments. Then level 4 introduces more control, where the periodic plans can be made, meaning you can plan on a weekly or a monthly basis, so periodically. And this also includes the expense plans. And then we have a level 5, which introduces even more complexity by including plan sets, so allowing you to rebalance to make sure you're staying on track. So at Nalis, we frequently operate at a level 4, sometimes a level 3. But for the sake of the rest of this presentation, let's say we're operating at a level 4. So in the next slide, the next step, now that we've identified the available resources from that people planner shown previously, is we now want to generate the periodic plans that we can convert to assignments. So if we take this working example, where we have a project budget of 69.5K, and of this, we want to allocate around $1,000 for materials, and then we know the project duration is around 11 weeks. So the report we use to plan people and expenses are the people planner plan with grid shown on the left, and then the expense planner plan with grid shown on the right. So you can tailor the duration of the planning time period to meet the project needs. So for this particular project, as it's only 11 weeks, I want to plan it on a weekly basis. But for longer projects, you may want to consider planning on a monthly basis. So from the available pool resources identified from the people planner, which we showed previously, I now need to select resources with the desired skill set, but I also want to balance the labour categories. So I may want to consider a lower labour category resource to actually execute the lab work, but then have a higher labour category resource to oversee the work and the analysis. So it's critical to get that good balance so we're not eating away at the budget too fast with just all highly trained, higher labour category resources. Then with respect to the expenses, so we estimated $1,000 for the materials, and based on the project needs, I know we're probably going to have a constant burn rate throughout as opposed to heavy expenditures up front. So I've just decided to split the money evenly across the 2 months. So I have the plans ready to go, but at this point, I have no concept of what this plan forecasts in terms of revenue. So my plan may be far too expensive for the budget. So on the next slide, the report that we use to show this data is the periodic cost summary barn line chart shown here on the right. So based on that grid plan I just showed you, it calculates the project revenue per week over the desired period performance shown by the yellow bars using the people and their associated labour category. So we build our burden, cost and fee into each billable hour to ensure we make a profit. And with this report, you can select to view the project cost as well as the revenue, where the difference will then give you your profit margin. But as it's T&M, right now I'm just interested in viewing the revenue. So the line shown here across the graph, this represents the cumulative total, and I can see that it's below the funded value, which is shown by the grey horizontal line across the graph. And you can actually hover on the cumulative line and it will give you the exact forecasted value. You can also double click on any of the individual bars, and this will open up a separate report where you can see a breakdown of all the costs contributing to that week's value. On the next slide, so if, however, this plan forecasted a value that was greater than the project budget, I would need to revisit my grid plan and alter it. So maybe I could switch out a person to a lower labour category of a similar skill set, or maybe some of the hours were originally overestimated and can now be reduced. So these two reports basically work in unison to get this desired outcome. And once you're happy with the plan, it can be converted to assignments by clicking the Assign button, and then, below the grid. And this now allows the resources to charge to the project. And I want to point out at this point here, you can actually add in a control that could be included that so people cannot exceed your allocated assignments. But personally, at this point, we tend not to put this in place just because it's R&D and plans can change quickly. But as the budget gets tighter, we can actually implement this control so the resources cannot exceed their allocated hours. So the next slide. The next step in the process, now you've converted your plans to your assignments, is the project monitoring. So Unanet offers many reports that can be used to monitor the business metrics. So the one that we often use is the Project Control Panel Summary Report that's shown here. So this report is basically a snapshot of the project's current financial status, including the real-time data. So it shows the project budget, the project revenue, remaining budget, and percentage expense. So it's a great report to indicate the current financial status. It doesn't give any indication of the progress with respect to the deliverables. So in the next slide, a useful report that we use to aid with this is the Project Periodic Performance Report that's shown here. So if we control the reporting at the task level, so when the project's initially set up, then we can actually see how many hours each person has spent on a particular task. So looking at this table here, you can see it lists the resources and their hours they've charged per week to the project and per task. So if we have a good gauge of how much time was estimated to complete a task, this report can identify if we're on track or whether there were unforeseen issues and more time was maybe spent than anticipated. And just to note here is that you can also view this as billable costs instead of the hours. So this report is really beneficial from a project management standpoint, as it can identify trends on your project progress versus the budget, and it can highlight if any decision points that may need to be made to ensure that we stay on track. And on the next slide, we have another report that we frequently use to make sure we're still on target with the budget, and that's the Project Periodic Forecast Report. So this report here captures your actual expenditures to date combined with forecasted plans. So if you look at the table, the weeks that are denoted with a star, these represent actual data. So up to the week commencing the 3rd of March, this is taken in real costs. Then the week of March the 10th, it's using a combination of actuals for the day around the report plus plans for the rest of that week. And then right the way through from the 17th to the 7th of April, that is now using plans from the original grid. So using the exact same project we planned from the beginning with that grid plan, this report is now showing me that it's forecasting 74.5k by the end of the period performance. But we know the project budget is only 69.5k. So I know that we're not on track to complete the project in this remaining time frame using those plans originally made. So to ensure we remain on track, this grid plan right back from the start needs to be revisited and new assignments need to be made. So on the final slide, this is just representing, it's a constant loop of forecasting, assigning, monitoring, and reforecasting. And without the reports and the real-time data that Unanet provides, the project management and the project success would be a lot more difficult. And these same principles I've discussed for this T&M example, you can also apply to your other contract types, where the difference just lies in the reports that you choose to monitor the metric of interest. So I'm going to pass back to Kim now.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Fern. That's very, very exciting, and looks like you guys are really on your way with your resource management discipline. So that gets us to our next poll. And how would you characterize your tool usage? The use of spreadsheets and a combination of tools would be number 1. 2 would be you're using a project-based ERP with a mix of manual processes and some automation. You have an enterprise project-based ERP, and you're able to see supply and demand at all levels for all your stakeholders. 4, you have enterprise use of a project-based ERP at an expert level. Or 5, your ERP is really woven into the entire organization. And I am really thinking that we're going to see, again, a number 2, where people really are still using a mix of manual activities around spreadsheets, as well as automation, and seeing a lot of information that's really project by project. And just think of the efficiencies that you could see if you could actually share that information between with each other versus having to email that Excel spreadsheet back and forth. So, Jess, what are the results of this poll?
Sure, Kim. It's kind of a mixed bag, but you predicted it for sure. So we have 26% are using spreadsheets and kind of a combination of tools. Excuse me. 61% are using a project-based ERP with a mix of manual and some automation. 11% are using enterprise use of project-based ERP, and they basically have supply and demand for everybody. We have 0% are doing the enterprise use of project-based ERP and expert level. And then we have 2% of the group is just reporting that the ERP is just woven into their entire organization.
That's awesome. All right, thank you. And thank you again all for answering that. So Fern showed this particular grid, and this is just a grid within Unanet. And the one thing about having a system where you can actually see all of the information in one place is that you have these very quick visual cues. So Fern talked about, if she has something that's red, she knows that she needs to do something. If she's got something with green, they can not pay attention, and that really allows you to do, management by exception when you can see this kind of information cut across your entire organization. One thing I wanted to bring up, because it really is a differentiator, is being able to look at resource plans through the entire project lifecycle. And so really starting from when you conceive that you might want to bid on a project and putting that in, or what I call phantom projects. And within a tool like Unanet, you're able to use things called TBD resources. So you're able to plan those, get the skill sets that you need, and then you're able then to put a factor on that. So, what is your P-win? What is the probability that you're going to win that project? You have that same ability then with projects that you're bidding, and to get that information in for those projects also, and then the projects that you're executing. So it is so powerful to really be able to see your annual operating plan, as well as your long-range plan, so maybe 3 to 5 years out, and then be able to model that plan and change that based on when the probability of win, probability of go, or however you're actually calculating that within the system itself, and be able to look at your total revenue forecast. And to me, that is a huge differentiator for a tool like Unanet, where you really have the resource planning as the heart of the ERP. And then in Unanet, you also have the ability to have dashboards with real-time information. And I'd tell you that at a minimum, you should be able to answer a couple of questions here. So what utilization do you need to be profitable? Can you answer that? What utilization do you need to aim for to prevent burnout of your staff? What's your actual billable and non-billable utilization? Can you see those metrics? And is your project profitability up to date so that people forecasting most accurately reflect the most likely billable revenue and utilization? And in order to answer these questions, we really need to have information and data. And so having real-time information around FTEs, how they're being utilized, project by project, and then really across the enterprise is critical. So from an overall perspective, Unanet truly does make the project lifecycle come alive. So you're able to plan, execute, monitor, invoice, and account within Unanet, and it really all starts with being able to do customer relationship management, be able to track all the different touches that you have with your customers and your prospects, and then do pipeline management, and then budget and forecast your revenue, as well as all of your different resources, and then understand what those skill mixes are. And I talked a little bit about being able to do scenario planning. To me, that's just absolutely huge. Being an ex-finance person, to be able to see and model what my revenue plans look like out over time, and then being able to execute the projects, that's very important, and be able to course correct like Fern was just talking about, and then monitor, so being able to look at the key performance indices so that I can make great decisions about where we are, and then invoice so that I get my cash in time, and then I can continue to pay people and continue then to grow the business and account for things in a proper manner. So be able to do all the accounting and pay all the bills that we need to be able to pay through the accounts payable activities. So Unanet really is that one software for projects, people, and financials. Now, Unanet, we do have some upcoming events. If you're interested in learning more about Unanet itself, or you're interested in learning more about resource management, you're welcome to come to any of these. You can go out onto our website, and we have all our events listed. And if at any point in time you don't see your city coming up, please feel free to reach out to myself or to Fern if you have any questions for Fern, or if you have any questions about Unanet. We would love to hear from you and love to hear your stories and how you're implementing your resource management discipline, or answer any questions we can from a Unanet perspective. All right, well, thank you so much for joining. Again, you'll be getting the presentation, you'll be getting the recording, and you'll also be getting our flip book. So thank you again.